Order. I call this meeting to order. This is a standing committee on natural resource and economic development. After a short delay, we're ready to go. I'm John White. I'm the MLA for Glace Bay and Dominion and the chair of this committee. Today we will hear presenters regarding the safeguarding the future of tidal energy in Nova Scotia. I ask you to please turn off your phones or put them on silent. And I'll remind you, in case of emergency, we were to go to the Granville Street exit and head up the Grand Parade where we'll be counted. Excuse me. I'll now ask committee members to introduce themselves, starting with MLA Ritzy on my left.
Good afternoon, everyone. Dave Ritzy, MLA for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Good afternoon. Welcome. Melissa Sheehy-Richard. I'm the MLA for Hants West.
Yeah, hello. Nolan Young, MLA for Shelburne.
Good afternoon, everyone. Chris Palmer, MLA for Kings West.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. Susie Hanson, the MLA for Halifax Needham.
Hi, I'm Gary Burl. I represent Halifax Chebucto.
Ronnie LeBlanc, MLA for Clare.
Ian Rankin, Timberley Prospect.
I'd also like to note the presence of Assistant Clerk to the House Assembly on my left, David Hastings, and Committee Clerk on my right, Tam Renousebi. So today is the future of tidal energy in Nova Scotia, and I asked the witnesses to give us just a brief introduction of yourself, and we'll come back for opening remarks, starting with Ms. Obermann on my left.
Sure. Good afternoon. Thanks for having me. My name is Elisa Obermann. I'm the Executive Director at Marine Renewables Canada.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lindsay Bennett, and I am the Executive Director of Fundy Ocean Research Centre for Energy, or FORCE. Thank you for having me.
And Mr. Hayman?
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Mr. Hayman, Jason Hayman. I am the original founder of Sustainable Marine Energy and former CEO, one of about 40 people who used to work for Sustainable Marine Energy.
Thank you. And coming back for opening remarks, is it Ms. Obermann? Do you have opening remarks?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much for having us here today. For some background, Marine Renewables Canada is an industry association focused on supporting the growth of tidal, offshore wind, wave, and river current energy. We represent over 180 member companies, including several tidal energy developers, communities, research organizations, and many local suppliers. So while we're a national organization, about 80% of our membership and our activities are in Nova Scotia. So my hope today is to provide you with some perspective on why tidal energy is important to Nova Scotia's clean energy future and how we can ensure it plays a role in both fighting climate change but also building a sustainable economy. Globally, tidal energy is being pursued by over 30 countries that have established supportive policies, funding, and supports to catalyze growth of the sector, and this includes Canada. In recognition of the tremendous potential of our country's marine renewable energy resources, governments, industry, and academia came together in 2011 to establish Canada's Marine Renewable Energy Technology Roadmap. It charted a course for the entire sector, with activities to develop tidal stream energy in the Bay of Fundy being a cornerstone of the strategy. A central premise of the strategy was a learn-by-doing approach. So this means devices must be deployed in order to learn more and drive down costs. Then, in 2012, as you're probably well aware, Nova Scotia released its Marine Renewable Energy Strategy to achieve its vision to be a global leader in the development of technology and systems that produce environmentally sustainable, competitively priced electricity from the ocean. Since then, the establishment of FORCE, market pull mechanisms such as the feed-in tariffs, and a path for commercial development through the Marine Renewable Energy Act put Nova Scotia on the map as the place to be for tidal energy development. These strategies and steps taken by government have attracted millions of dollars in international investment and created new business opportunities and jobs in rural communities. However, as we know, there have been challenges along the way. The development of tidal energy has hit technical, financial, and regulatory roadblocks. This really isn't unique at all for an emerging technology, so that's one thing I think we all have to keep in mind. And it's also why having an entity like FORCE and the long-term commitment and support of government is so crucial to the proving of technology, but also to the building of this new industry. So while the sector has faced challenges, realizing the potential of tidal energy may be more important to Nova Scotia and the world than it really ever was before. As you know, we're experiencing increasing impacts from climate change on a daily basis. To fight climate change and achieve net zero targets, We also know that onshore wind and solar are going to play a major role, but as a 2020 International Energy Agency report states, reaching net zero by 2050 requires further rapid deployment of available technologies as well as widespread use of technologies that are not on the market yet. Analysis from multiple studies also shows that Canada will need at least 2 to 3 times more clean electricity produced to meet net zero goals, and possibly even more when we start to factor in the production of green hydrogen for domestic and export needs. Nova Scotia also has ambitious renewable electricity targets that need to be met. And so to meet the demands for more clean electricity, we have to tap into all of our renewable energy resources, including those from our oceans. Tidal energy in particular has the unique attribute of being predictable, a characteristic that can support the integration and uptake of more intermittent renewable energy resources. It can cut down on the need for generation assets, grid infrastructure, and storage. So in other words, what I'm saying is that more tidal also means more wind and more solar. Since the strategies that I talked about were established over a decade ago to support the tidal sector, we also know that a lot has changed. The global energy transition creates urgency for more uptake of renewable energy resources. We have also learned more about tidal technologies and interactions with the marine environment after numerous device deployments worldwide. And while the costs of tidal energy remain higher than some renewables, modeling suggests that the rates of growth seen in offshore wind in the last 20 years will be reproduced in the tidal sector between 2030 and 2050. The tidal sector has made significant strides over the years, and I think now we really need to build on the foundation of research, investment, and learning to realize its full potential. So this requires certainty, investment certainty, regulatory certainty, and a strong signal and commitment from government to work collaboratively with industry to address challenges and develop solutions. So in closing, I would like to thank the committee again for this opportunity to be here today. I look forward to your questions. And Marine Renewables Canada is committed to driving the growth of Nova Scotia's tidal energy sector, and we also look forward to working with you and others to make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Bennett, did you have opening remarks?
I do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Force is Canada's leading tidal energy demonstration project, located in Minas Passage, Bay of Fundy, and recognized as one of the leading tidal test centers globally. We were created by the province of Nova Scotia and supported by successive governments of all stripes, thank you all, to study tidal technology and the role it can play in our clean energy future. And we have the support of Nova Scotians, over 80% of whom support tidal demonstration, according to public opinion research. Our site is unique. We are home to the highest tides in the world. As the coastline narrows through Minas Passage, the water flow is pinched, like your thumb over a garden hose, causing it to speed up. 14 billion tons of water flows through the passage each tide cycle, moving over 20 kilometers an hour. It's a lot of water moving very fast. And water speed means water power, generating an estimated 2,500 megawatts of extractable power, more than Nova Scotia's total peak demand on a cold night in February, equal to taking 1 million cars worth of emissions off the road. Nova Scotia designed Force to play 2 roles. First, as a host to technology. We built a world-class facility to connect tidal energy devices to the grid and deliver electricity to Nova Scotians. The power cables that connect tidal devices in our lease area to our onshore substation and to your homes, together with our staggering resource, have attracted companies from across the country and around the world. Our second role is as steward, working to better understand the physical and biological conditions of the site and report our findings online to regulators and to the public. Working with many local and international partners, our science team has conducted over 100 studies with a particular focus on fish and marine mammals. But that work will not be funded nor be relevant without active tidal projects. And that's why we're here today. Sustainable Marine Energy ended operations in Canada because they couldn't see a clear federal regulatory pathway to deliver their project at Force. The first floating platform in Canada to successfully deliver electricity to the grid. Fortunately, they are not the only company active in the Bay of Fundy. Nova Innovation, DP Energy, O'Current Power, and Eau Claire Tidal, who are bringing orbital marine power to Force. But without question, the tidal energy sector needs a straightforward process for how each project is evaluated. that gives developers some consistency and clarity about how to move from one device to more, and that protects Indigenous fisheries, commercial and recreational fisheries, and marine life. Without this, our sector is at risk, and Force is also at risk. Our test site was created as an instrument of public policy and built with public dollars, but we are dependent on private dollars for our ongoing operations. If companies depart Canada for regions with a simpler regulatory process, not only does Nova Scotia lose the economic activity, but also the potential benefit of the resource. The UK has licensed over 90 megawatts of project activity. And last year, France announced a €65 million investment in a 17 megawatt tidal project. The US and other countries are ramping up their supports for marine energy, spurring private investment, which in the UK surged to 75% last year. I want to thank the Premier and this government for pushing the federal government to make some changes. I also want to thank the Federal Ministers of Fisheries and Oceans Canada and Natural Resource Canada for getting together to respond. The task force they struck to look at this specific issue recently delivered a number of encouraging actions, all of which Force is positioned to support or lead, including a revised approach to how DFO will evaluate projects, support for new research related to monitoring and collision risk, and a commitment to ensure regulators better collaborate with the international scientific community. They've already begun to make good on that commitment. 2 DFO representatives joined me on a technology site tour in the UK just last month. That's how we get this right, by working together. And there are still a number of challenges to overcome in the tidal sector. Anytime you work in the ocean, it's going to be harder and more costly. But the benefits of a predictable, renewable source of power that flows in our own backyard, spends our energy dollars here at home, and puts hundreds of companies to work here remains a compelling solution, combined with more than a decade of experience and innovation to pave the way for the next stage of development in Nova Scotia. Last year, the writing on the wall was clearer than ever. Climate change means more fires, more floods, more extreme weather, rising temperatures, rising sea levels. We can't just hope this year is not as bad as last year. We need to act. And we've got an action right in front of us, moving more water on every tide than all the rivers in the world combined. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hayman, did you have open remarks?
Yes, please. Yeah, so first of all, apologies that I can't be there in person. Did go to a substantial effort to shorten a trip to New Zealand. The first time this it was proposed that this committee, I suppose, would meet on this topic over a year ago, at which time we were hopeful that perhaps it could help in our plight. Unfortunately, here we are 13 months later, and yeah, I no longer work for Sustainable Marine Energy, nor does anyone else, because unfortunately, we were not able to continue our tidal energy journey in Nova Scotia, and therefore we were not able to continue our journey as a company. As Elisa and Lindsay have both very well articulated, the resource that you have in Nova Scotia and the facility at Force is absolutely amazing. And it's what attracted us and attracted me to come to Nova Scotia in 2018. Before that, it attracted our largest shareholder, Tidal, who had also invested in another company, BlackRock Tidal, who first obtained a berth at Force back in 2014. So, you know, it really, that resource and that facility kept us going. I suppose the promise of developing project there kept us going for almost 10 years. We came up with what we thought was a very responsible, staged, structured approach to developing our technology, improving it up. We didn't actually go to Force initially. We developed a site down at Grand Passage, down the end of the Digby Neck, which has slightly less resource, but was, let's say, a stepping stone, and always was intended to be a stepping stone to Force, which is absolutely the prize and the crown jewels in one of the best tidal sites anywhere in the world. We did manage to successfully demonstrate that our technology worked at Grand Passage, and we spent a heck of a lot of money, time, and effort, not only proving up the viability of the technology, but also working on understanding any potential impacts to marine wildlife and the environment. Of course, that is a continual journey, and we worked with a lot of great Canadian, particularly Nova Scotian companies like Innovasi, on different different technologies to do that. But it is a new field, and ultimately, we were, I suppose, the lack of alignment of provincial and federal regulators, and the lack of technically competent leadership from to the whole tidal energy program resulted in us not being able to deliver what we had promised to our investors, and in fact what the province had licensed us to deliver or provide us a license for, because DFO were not going to in any way, shape, or form align their approach to the rollout of this technology, I suppose, to the approach of Enercan or the approach of the province or the approach of Force and others. So we ended up in an intractable situation where we had everything. We had a technology that worked. We had a fantastic team that was growing rapidly in Nova Scotia, 22 people working on the core team, as well as a number of suppliers that were absolutely critical to us, including places like AF Terrio down in Matagan. And we brought in made a major investment to bring in a highly specialized vessel that was custom built to help us roll out these initial demonstration projects at Force. And Enercan made a tremendous investment into the program as well. And I can only describe what happened as an act of economic vandalism. And I suppose I'm here today really for three reasons. One is that remain very hopeful that there is a path that can be crafted or constructed to realize the potential of Nova Scotia's tidal energy resource with credible tidal energy players that are out there, and Lindsay mentioned some of them, and within a process where there is regulatory alignment, which will actually hopefully get investment rolling back into the sector, because currently your resource is a stranded asset because of this impasse. The second is hopefully lessons can be learned out of this that can be applied to the development of other resources such as offshore wind and your sort of fuel text, which Nova Scotia has tremendous potential. But if these sort of issues are not addressed, they will also not be successfully realized. And the third is I'd very much like to see the people responsible for this travesty brought to account for. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In regards to closing the witnesses and the questioning, we usually stop at 20 to 3, at 2:40. So I would like to propose that we stop at 2:50 and allow the witness to leave with a 2-minute break. We just stay in our seats if all caucuses are in agreement. We're good. So we'll stop at 2:50. So I would also, a reminder, we'll all do this, but we have to wait until I recognize you, until your microphone turns red, so that Ledge TV can record our conversation. And with that, I will open the floor for speakers. I'll take a list. Just give me a wave. I am starting right now with MLA Young, and then I'll look around to get everybody else. Thank you. MLA Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just that number staggering, 14 billion tons of clean renewable tidal power. That's like astonishing amount. In the opening remarks, it was mentioned that you encountered some federal regulatory challenges. And I guess just in simple terms, the Nova Scotians can understand. I'm wondering if you could just be specific in the challenges with the federal regulations that you encountered that led to the decision to withdraw from Nova Scotia. And I guess I could put that out for whoever best could answer that, maybe Mr. Hayman or Ms. Obermann.
Mr. Hayman?
Take that. Absolutely. Yes, so very specifically, it was, I suppose, there is, I want to be clear, first of all, there is no policy, there is no federal policy which deals with or informs regulators about how they should license tidal energy deployments. So what is being used is the Fisheries Act. And so we end up in this sort of quite bizarre situation where we're effectively the regulators using a piece of legislation that's not designed for this purpose at all to try and regulate the testing and development of a new type of, I suppose, renewable energy in Canada's waters. And just want to make clear, I mean, Canada has no renewable energy generation. There is no way to get permission to install any kind of renewable energy in Canada's waters at this time because there is no path for that. Doesn't matter whether you want to do floating solar, floating wind, tidal, because that policy does not exist. So I suppose, so the regulators are using a set of tools which are probably not appropriate for the task, and then they choose how to apply those. And originally it was our understanding that basically FORCE was set up as a sandbox. So it's a demonstration site and a site in which to test and demonstrate technologies, and with a limited capacity and size and so forth. And somehow there seems to be a change of policy that no one was, or change in, sorry, not policy, but in change within the Department for Fisheries and Oceans in the manner in which they decide to apply these regulations. And it came about that they decided around 2018 that any projects would require authorizations under the Fisheries Act. So we actually applied for an authorization under the Fisheries Act for both phases, the initial prototype and then the grid-connected demonstrator at Grand Passage. And we were able to secure those, and they were for very limited amounts of time and had a lot of constraints around them. But they were not willing to provide us with authorizations that were workable in any shape, basically, at FORCE, and certainly didn't align with wouldn't enable us to align with either the licensing or the license conditions that of a license with the province, nor would it technically match up with doing a project at FORCE, nor was it investable. So we'd spent a couple of years really working hard with the province and others, trying to come up with a staged, stepwise approach to rolling out our demonstration project at FORCE, which would have involved putting one platform up at FORCE and then putting two more platforms up there to make a first small array of 1.26 megawatts. And then we would have eventually have built that out over a number of years to 9 megawatts, which I'm sure any of you who do follow renewable energy realize it's about the size of one modern offshore turbine these days. So, you know, we thought we had proposed quite a stepwise approach, but we were unable to secure the necessary authorizations. And basically the project financiers gave up. They didn't have a choice. You know, it's the same as if you're going to go build a house and you get a mortgage agreement from the bank. If you don't get it done within a certain amount of time, that offer is taken off the table. And they were very, very patient with us and with everyone, and gave us about 18 months worth of extensions to try and get these licenses and get the project away. And in the end, we had to come back to them and say, it doesn't look like this is going to fly. And at that stage, then we basically had to hand over the keys, shut it down.
Thank you. Ms. Obermann?
Yeah, I think to explain it just from an industry perspective as well, because that particular regulatory challenge was not just a challenge for Sustainable Marine. We had other members that were raising it, and just to put it into perspective, the main challenge here is that an authorization initially would be allowed for one device typically, and then time would go on for monitoring. So it would take about a year probably for to get the results that you would need to be able to move forward to the next phase. So you could imagine, with a project that requires 20 devices, you couldn't wait. A developer couldn't wait 20 years to get their return on investment. So it really becomes a challenge, from a commercial perspective. And as Jason, rightly pointed out, the Fisheries Act was not designed to be looking at these types of new technologies, nor are many other pieces of legislation. And so when we think about any legislation, whether it's federal or provincial, and how we're really going to meet the needs of energy transition and meeting net zero goals, this is, it's a big question mark in terms of how these projects can move ahead, in a streamlined and efficient process. And I think as we move on in this sector, but in the renewable sector as a whole, this is going to continue to be something that comes up. So I think a conversation like this today, that's why it's so important to kind of understand, what do we need to do to solve that problem.
Thank you. Next, I have Emily Burrell, who will be followed by Emily Palmer. Emily Burrell.
Thank you. Ms. Bennett, you spoke when you were setting this up about the crucialness of a clear regulatory pathway. We know the Marine Renewables have been very emphatic about that. That's part of the advocacy for the task force report. So now we've got the report. I'm curious to know if perhaps each of you could speak to this. Does the report of the task force fill the bill that's been called for the clear regulatory pathway? And if not, could you set out what you think is still needed?
Ms. Bennett?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I know, is one, that Elisa is regularly engaging with her members on, and we're in discussions with our industry members at Force. What has been laid out through the task force are really three key actions. They've outlined a revised staged approach, and so this is, again, intended to provide more clarity about how developers can move from one device to multiple. And under the provincial licensing regime, berths at Force are 4.5 to 5 megawatts. And so providing that clarity and predictability for developers to understand how they move forward is essential. And I would say through the work of the task force, it was really taking stock of some of these challenges and opportunities in the tidal sector. And it's important to remember that when we're talking about single device deployments or even small arrays, we really need these devices deployed so that we can study and understand the potential for effects and move the sector forward. But when you look at the international research, that's been quite encouraging to date. We still have work to do in the Bay of Fundy to understand, how these devices might interact with the unique environment there. But there's been two key findings internationally, and that is that in over a decade of research, there has been no recorded observation of either a marine mammal or a seabird colliding with a tidal device anywhere in the world. And also it is expected with these single device or even small arrays that any potential impacts will be very, very low. And, just to contextualize, the demonstration in the project at Force even further, when you look at a project like Sustainable Marine Energies, 3 of their 420 kilowatt platforms, of which there was one grid connected in Grand Passage, 3 of those, in the cross section of the Minas Passage, which is about 5 kilometers across, would be comparable to a tennis ball in a basketball court. So it's a very, very small footprint for these projects as we aim to deploy and learn.
Ms. Obermann?
Thank you. And just to kind of build on Lindsay's comments, I think, what we heard from our members was a lot of optimism that the actions that were included in the task force would, if implemented well and efficiently, so within not a long time frame, that they would help the sector quite a bit. But what I think is one of the really key things with the task force, which we never had before as a sector, was this collaboration between the province, the federal government, and industry on this, these regulatory issues. And so for the task force to really be effective or in its implementation, that ongoing collaboration, I think, is going to be extremely critical because, we know we're going to come up against things that we weren't anticipating when that task force report came out. And there's going to need to be decisions that need to be made. And so I would really stress that partnership and collaboration is going to be very key in how the sector will move forward.
I will allow a follow-up question. Emily Burrell.
Thank you. So I just want to understand as clearly as possible. Then, in your view, do the recommendations of the task force cut the mustard in terms of what's been called for?
Ms. Obermann.
Thank you. One of the key things that industry was looking for was an authorization that would authorize an entire project rather than one device at a time. So this revised staged approach that will help industry essentially go to their investors and show that there is a longer term, financial path to how they can move forward. So if that goes well, and developers can meet those conditions within the authorization as we go through each stage, I do think that we will have a positive result from the task force work. Yeah.
MLA Palmer. Oh, you were sorry. I didn't see your hand up there, Ms. Bennett.
Yeah, thank you. Not to follow on, Elisa's touched on the revised staged approach and the terms of authorizations that provide that path. But some of the other findings and actions that are recommended in the task force report are really key for the implementation and us to fully realize this opportunity of tidal. And so those were, continuing research to understand collision risk and also to develop monitoring approaches for tidal energy devices, and really that collaboration and partnership between all the different partners and government agencies involved, but really the participation from DFO is key at working with the sector so that we can clarify that path forward, what's expected in monitoring, and a strong signal from them in sending representatives to the UK recently on that technology tour.
Thank you. Thank you for catching that, Emily Burrow. Emily Palmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here today, all of you. And I have a constituency in Kings West where I have a coastline of the Bay of Fundy, and I definitely see the effects of the tides on a daily basis in my area for sure. I'm going to ask just a general overall question. We're touching on a lot of the regulatory, the pathways for the process. But I guess if I could just ask you to give me, or the people in Nova Scotia, what's the current state of tidal energy, the industry of tidal energy in Canada? We're talking some generalities here, but if you were to kind of give us a snapshot of the current state of tidal energy in Canada, how would you?
Ms. Obermann.
So just for background, other than Nova Scotia, there's other provinces that are also looking at tidal energy. So, for example, we have a lot of members in British Columbia. The opportunity is a bit different there. And so in terms of getting communities off of diesel, which, we don't face that here in Nova Scotia, but it's a major opportunity. And so there's a number of projects and proposals underway for actually with Indigenous communities to partner with them using tidal and actually wave energy as well. And in Nova Scotia, other than projects at Force, there's also a number of other proponents and projects underway. I would say in terms of technology readiness and commercial readiness, we are still at a pre-commercial stage, but that's also why Force is so important in terms of their role in how to move the industry forward. And so I had mentioned projects in British Columbia. Some of them have been looking at what will happen at Force, what will happen in Nova Scotia, in order to export technologies from that have been used in Nova Scotia and to use them in other places in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Emily Palmer for follow-up.
And I was going to ask Ms. Bennett a question around the impact the tidal turbines actually have on the movement of fish through the Bay of Fundy. And you've sort of touched on it in one of your previous answers, just the scope of the size of the turbines, the fish flow, and the different things around that. Could you just elaborate again on that so people who might be watching this today really talk about the size and the design of tidal equipment and the potential on marine life and the scope of what that means in the grand scheme of things?
Ms. Bennett.
Thank you. Yes, certainly. And so, there is an immense opportunity in the Bay of Fundy, and Force was built. We were created by the province of Nova Scotia to explore what that opportunity could be to contribute to Nova Scotia's clean energy mix. So we are about learning. and lowering the barriers of entry for proponents to come in and test their devices, connect them to the grid, and feed that clean, renewable electricity to the homes of Nova Scotians. The technical capacity of our site right now is 30 megawatts. We have 22 megawatts in projects that are licensed there currently. And as I said, in terms of scope, the cross-section between where we're located on the Cumberland Shore near Parsborough and the other side of the Minas Passage is about 5 kilometers. And so, as I said, I believe Sustainable Marines project and what they were pursuing or intending to pursue with DFO was one device, but 3 of those at 420 kilowatts each would have represented, in comparison, about a tennis ball and a basketball court. So again, in this early stage of learning and testing and demonstration, it is about getting these first devices deployed so we can study and understand the interactions. Our team at Force is mostly science-based. We have a team of scientists and ocean technologists. There's been over $20 million worth of research conducted, over 100 studies that are all publicly available on our website. We've collected a lot of baseline data over the years. And at this point, we really need devices deployed so that we can study them in the environment and really understand those the potential for interactions. We also have a lot of work ongoing with many, many partners, Acadia Tidal Energy Institute, Mi'kmaq Conservation Group we've worked with in the past, some local fishers, to try and collect data to understand collision risk and the likelihood of encounters at our site. So there's been a lot of work done, but to move to this next stage, we need devices deployed.
Next up, I have Mr. Hayman.
Yeah, so I think just to follow up there on Lindsay's point, I mean, the actual reality of the situation right now is that you have a resource and a fantastic facility there at Force, which Lindsay and our team are doing a great job doing fundamental research around, but it's impossible to do that fundamental research without tech deployed. We have shown that it is absolutely technically and operationally viable to generate tidal energy in the Bay of Fundy at Grand Passage and generate it and put it onto the grid. Now, if you want to get the cost of that down, if you want to get that slicker, you need to learn by doing, and that's how we learn in any industry, in any sector. It doesn't matter whether it's shipbuilding, doesn't matter if it's fishing, you have to learn to trade, and you have to learn by doing. And there's only so much research that can be done about turbine-fish interaction without actually having any turbines in the water. And currently, you've got a grid connection there, amazing, amazing facility, 30 megawatt grid connection with 0 megawatts going through it. And the really, really unfortunate thing is that people around the world are willing to invest in these technologies and in demonstrating these technologies and in putting devices in the water in Nova Scotia. Our shareholder base was very diverse, from people with wide-ranging, very large German investor base, a lot of UK investors, a lot of investors from as far wide as Singapore even. But none of that money is currently flowing in and is going to flow in these projects until the regulatory path is clear. And I think while there was some positive noises, I would say, that have come out of the task force, we have yet to see as an industry anything resembling an actual regulatory pathway that sets out the rules of engagement, that says, hey, if you want to come and run your car on the test track, these are the rules. You got to have a seatbelt. You know, car could be this size. Do what you know. You need rules and guidelines that are clear and that are the same for everyone, and that are where you have the regulators aligned. Until you get that, I'm afraid that my prognosis is that you'll remain in purgatory, effectively, doing lots and lots of fundamental research without really treading water, basically, just trying to stem the tide.
Thank you. Next up is MLA Burrell.
Thank you.
You are there. You asking a question?
You had your hand up, Eddie. Yeah, so Mr. LeBlanc had his hand up before me there.
He did, but I had MLA Hanson down first, and I thought she switched it with you.
Well, I'm happy to have Mr. LeBlanc go first.
Okay, MLA LeBlanc, because you were next anyway.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank MLA Burrell. as MLA for Clare, obviously, Mr. Hayman mentioned Aftario. So that, to me, that's an impressive company who sees a lot of potential in tidal energy, and I believe would be a strong partner. And I've had multiple conversations with them around the regulatory challenges. But putting that, I guess, aside, looking at the big picture, what is he mentioned the state of the industry in Canada, but specifically in Nova Scotia. Is the window closing, I guess? How quick does this have to move forward so that there's business certainty and business attractiveness for Nova Scotia before business start looking elsewhere, I guess is the question. There must be a time frame that those recommendations have to be approved and move forward.
So, Ms. Obermann?
So I think something that all of us have said today is that one of the most important things that the sector needs in order to advance is a device deployed and operating so that we can also collect, the data and information that regulators require, but also so that stakeholders can build some confidence around what's happening with the devices and how are they interacting with the environment. I would say, and this is just my personal opinion, that it would be a very positive and big win for us if we could see a device deployed within the next year, at the longest period of time, or at least the signal to supply chain and others that is happening, and so that's why the work that the task force is doing, the work that Force is doing to help implement some of the task force results and actions are going to be very critical to that. But I think with some of the challenges that we've seen, we do know that the world is watching, right? And so we do need to move forward and have a win for the sector.
Emily LeBlanc.
Putting aside, we all know the challenges around the regulatory process, but putting that aside, is there anything that the government of Nova Scotia or as a province we could do to support the industry to make sure it's viable as we work through all those challenges?
Ms. Bennett?
Thank you. Yes, sir, that's a great question. And I think everybody has a role to play, and that theme kind of definitely came through during the meetings of the task force, particularly in the latter months as we knew we were sort of winding up and moving towards a final report. Just very briefly to go back to your first question, the time is right now. I think that this is a critical window. We've taken stock. We've done this work through the task force with the province of Nova Scotia at the table, with NRCan and with DFO and industry. And now we have a set of actions and a path forward. And so the implementation of those things beginning right now, and in fact, there's work happening right now by team members that I have in my organization to implement some of the actions and drive those forward. And so there certainly is some urgency. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember the second part of your question.
Emily LeBlanc.
What role the province or the government of Nova Scotia could play as they wait for the regulatory problems to be resolved?
Ms. Bennett.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. And so, the work of the task force and the final report and its findings represents, in our view, a transition and a turning point, a potential turning point, if we can continue to drive those actions forward and implement. And so, to move forward successfully, I think that all of the parties that, formed the task force essentially and were seated at those tables have their varying roles. And so we need that long-term and strong recommitment of support from the province of Nova Scotia, like we've been fortunate to benefit from for so long. And in particular, there's actions outlined in the task force report, such as the continued research, continued and strong engagement, ongoing engagement with all stakeholders, with rights holders. And those are areas where we benefited from the support of the province in the past, and we very much hope that continues.
I believe Mr. Hayman have a comment. Mr. Hayman.
Yes, thank you. Just to sort of add to Lindsay's comments here. I think absolutely I suppose for us the time would have been maybe a year or 18 months ago. And I think actually, but hopefully, I mean, it will take more work to get things back up to where they were. Unfortunately, AFTRIOs and many other Nova Scotia supply chain companies missed out on tens of millions of dollars in projects for that first, in contracts for that first project, which was fully funded and the money was sitting there ready to go, and it didn't get deployed. But be as it may, there is a role for the province in this, and I think the province is absolutely pivotal, and that role is leadership. This resource is unique to Nova Scotia. This is a Nova Scotian resource, and the province had the foresight and to see this opportunity and to work with the federal government and industry to create force and to put what was at the time a very avant-garde piece of legislature in the Marine Renewables Act in place, and that's what attracted us there. It had the trifecta. It had a piece of legislation that enabled the deployment of marine renewable energy devices in a manner which gave people, we thought, a clear runway. The challenge is that they, of course, I suppose, weren't able to bring their contemporaries in the federal government, or specifically within DFO, along on that journey. And that if you are providing leadership and you are trying to promote the development of a resource, that is a role, I believe, for the provincial government. It's not a role for industry. And it's not a role that either Marine Renewables Canada or Force, for that matter, can perform. So if anyone can hold the federal government and DFO accountable to their actions and determine whether it's just mismanagement or there's something darker at play within the particular scenario, or make sure that they're performing to the standards, or even build alignment and agree on a joined up approach, it takes leadership to do that. And I think that's what the province can provide right now, is leadership to the sector to ensure that Nova Scotia benefits from the development of this amazing resource.
Thank you. And next, Emily Hanson, you have given up your spot to Emily Burrell, right?
That is correct.
So Emily Burrell.
Thank you. I wonder if you could each provide us with a little mini primer on the issue of energy pricing with tidal energy. So you hear quite a bit about the comparative expensiveness of tidal energy, but I don't have a sense. I don't think there's been a broad discussion about how that's potentially affected by the volume of production. So I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit.
Ms. Obermann, I'm looking at Mr. Hayman. He's roaring at you.
Oh, so, he can go first.
Ms. Obermann.
I have just a quick response to that, and then Jason can take it. But really, it's, for cost reductions and volume is important because you get economies of scale. And so if you think about the supply chain even, they have to ramp up their capacity, their capabilities. If they know that there's going to be more development, they can do that. So they can do things at a lower cost, which means also transfers to a lower cost for the cost of electricity coming from tidal. So really, bottom line, it comes to economies of scale. And I'll turn it over to Jason.
Mr. Hayman.
Sure. To assess the cost of something, you need a sample size greater than 0. And that's the fundamental issue here. We put one device in that we'd spent 10 years and tens of millions of dollars developing, ran it for a period of time, and then weren't able to proceed with deploying subsequent evolutions of that technology to try and get the cost down. So you need actual cost trajectory. If you look at something like, for example, wind or solar, there is a cost trajectory there over decades of research and development, and then into demonstration projects, and then to commercial rollout. If you can't have those demonstration projects, you're never going to get that sample size up, and you're never actually going to discover what the cost is. So any discussions around the cost of tidal energy at this stage are absolute red herrings, because you're still dealing with something that's at such a nascent stage. But the potential is well documented, and the potential's there. But if you have to spend millions and millions of dollars doing lots of fundamental research and spending lots of money on lawyers and everything else to try and get permits through on just one small device, then it costs more than putting a man on the moon at that point, and it's not economically viable.
Ms. Bennett?
Yeah, so I'll not to reiterate any of these points. Obviously, with scale, costs will come down. There's a lot of challenges in tidal energy, certainly in the science and the engineering and cost. And I think everyone recognizes that the cost of tidal energy does need to come down for it to actually be a viable, clean, renewable energy source in the long term. What FORCE was created to do was to understand and to demonstrate on the grand scheme of things, it's a little bit of energy at a very high price so that we can learn what this opportunity is for Nova Scotia. And if we look at the trajectory of other renewables, we know that it did take decades for those costs to come down. While we know that costs will come down with scale, we also know that the impacts of climate change are increasing by the day.
Emily Burrow.
Hayman, then, are you saying, in fact, that there is not anything we can say effectively at this point about the cost differential for tidal power in comparison to other renewables?
Mr. Hayman?
No, I don't believe you really can. You need discovery, you need price discovery, and you need a competitive environment where people are installing multiple devices. That's what FORCE was supposed to provide. If you do one, and then you do a couple more, and then you do a couple more after that, and you ramp it up, you learn what the cost of actually doing it is. But if you're just spending millions and millions of dollars, just standing still, and it doesn't, it costs a lot to run a technology development company. You've got to pay the bills every month, you pay staff, you've got to pay for boats, go out there and put things out in the water and test it and break it and fix it, and it costs a lot of money. We do know that the potential, we can look at other technologies, similar technologies, and we can make very good projections. There's lots of studies around that. But the costs just get completely blown out of the water when you have to spend all your time, money, and resources fighting issues like this regulatory alignment. And in the end, investors just give up and walk away.
Next, I have Emily Richard, followed by Emily Ritchie. Emily Richard.
Are we in? No. Okay. Sorry. I was distracted by saying we were in recess. So I find this really interesting. I've heard of FORCE. So, Parsborough was kind of adjacent to my community. But, we're talking about greening the grid and fighting climate change. And it just seems to me so hypocritical of a federal government that is carbon taxing, Nova Scotians out of their homes, but yet not willing to work on a regulatory process with, industry leaders and the like to harness this energy that will actually make a difference on our climate impact. So I just do want to pivot a little bit, though, because Ms. Obermann, you mentioned in your opening remarks that your organization has helped already do a lot of the legwork to develop a roadmap, if you will. And I'm just wondering, that impact that it might have on current policies and funding, because to me it seems like, why is that, is that roadmap not like it's just, there's the work, how can we not use some of that work to create the policy that we need to have these projects come to fruition?
Ms. Obermann.
Thank you. No, it's a good question. And one of the reasons I opened with, kind of providing some of that history is because that was also over a decade ago. And so, a lot of the steps that were in the roadmap, which was a national strategy, and Nova Scotia was involved, so was, the federal government, industry. A lot of the steps have been taken. And then, a lot has also happened with Nova Scotia's marine renewable energy strategy to get to this point. So there has been progress. I think the key thing that we haven't really done too much of is really reflected on what has gone well, and then, what is needed when we really think about how does Tidal fit into, what is its role in the energy transition, particularly in Nova Scotia? How do we want it to fit? And I think, having a strategy that can evolve with that would be really important. So, looking back at 2011, 2012, we were at a different time. We really weren't talking about climate change as much as we are now. And I think there's still some really solid actions and steps there. But I think what would be helpful, from an industry perspective, is if we look at that and think, what else could we be doing, or what should we be doing now, or how can we pivot, to meet the needs of electricity demand and the growing economy where we are now.
Did you have a question there, Emily Hanson? No, I just want to be able to listen. Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry. Emily Ritchie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess this question's for Ms. Bennett. It's can you expand a bit on the data collected by the FAST subsea platforms and how that data is used to inform turbine design, environmental impact assessments overall?
Ms. Bennett?
Thank you for the question. So the Fundy Advanced Sensor Technology Program, which was initially kind of kickstarted with funding from Natural Resources Canada, that is our subsea environmental monitoring program. So we equip these subsea platforms with various sensors and pieces of equipment to collect data. And so an example of some of the types of technology that we've deployed and use with these subsea platforms, acoustic Doppler current profilers, for instance, to collect data that we provide to developers so that they can factor those metrics into their engineering design for different for their technologies. We, at times, have deployed fish receivers. So this is using acoustic telemetry to detect fish that might be tagged that are passing through an area where a platform is and with range of that receiver. Force has also really advanced capabilities in data collection in high flow sites. And so, with 14 billion tons of water reaching up to 20 kilometers an hour, a lot of the off-the-shelf type sensors, just don't work at our site. And in the early days, actually, a lot of them would just be gone. And so we have a very capable and talented team. As I said, it's mostly science-based and ocean technologists that have learned how to deploy equipment and, most importantly, get it back with all of that amazing data. And, some of the innovations that we've developed at Force over the years, for instance, the Vectron, which is a new device which uses converging ADCP beams to generate high-res flow data at the site. We use radar. We screen in the backscatter, which is unconventional from how it's traditionally used, and that's so that we can understand wave effects on velocity. And so those are just some of the types of innovations that we have created at Force under the FAST program.
Thank you. To the committee members, we've just got an email from Mr. Hayman saying he has to leave in 10 minutes, so we have till 20 after 2 with him. I'm proposing, if you have questions directed to him specifically, my list of speakers are MLA Burrell and MLA Young, and I can move MLA LeBlanc to the top as well, and then we could have one caucus question each for him if you want to, a direct question to him before he leaves. We have 10 minutes for him. Does that work?
You don't have me on your list.
That was the mix-up with you two switching around, okay. But I will put you on top if you want. No? Okay, so question specifically to Mr. Hayman. If we don't have any more, I have... Okay, I have Emily Young up next, so we'll just keep on going until he's finished then. There's no need to change the order. So I have Emily Young, who will be followed by Emily LeBlanc. Emily Young.
Yeah. Thank you. Without getting to the thick of things, I guess, Mr. Chair, I mean, you have all this renewable energy that's out there. You have, an untapped amount that the feds could be helping us to tap into, and it seems all we get is a carbon tax, Mr. Chair. But to Mr. Hayman, what do you believe is the most important steps that could be taken to support the tidal industry so that we can avoid future failures?
Mr. Hayman?
I think the key thing here is to get all of the stakeholders that are involved together very quickly and agree on how this technology could be, I suppose, demonstrated and rolled out. And to do that, you sort of need a number of things that need to be covered off. And those are ensuring that I would say environmental risks, which are, I suppose, front and center here in the DFO debate, are covered off, but that they're understood. And that then, I suppose, programs are put in place to try and learn through subsequent deployments what those risks actually are, which ones actually materialize. I think at the moment, don't forget, we're talking about perceived risks, not real risks. We're talking about things that people are postulating about and saying might happen, but we haven't seen happen. No one's actually ever seen a fish get injured by a tidal turbine. So, but there's I suppose some people have a hypothesis that they could be. So we need to figure out how can we see if that does happen. And so that's only things that you can do through learning. But then there's also technical risks. So, you need to ensure that the proponents coming in to the test site, that they have to sort of, I suppose, have to be able to demonstrate their technical competence. And I would suggest that having, this sort of graduated program, as you do in most disciplines, where you have to demonstrate that you can achieve at one type of site at one level. For example, like at a place like Grand Passage, before you try and deploy at force, which has often been sort of, I suppose, described as the Mount Everest of tidal energy, because there is a huge amount of power there. So it's a very challenging site to work at. And we've seen before, I suppose in the past, technical failures at force in the first deployment that happened there, because they tried to go, we believe, because they tried to go straight to force and didn't sort of work their way up the chain. So, and then the other one is the commercial risks. And to deal with the commercial risks, and I suppose you need to have a sort of, I suppose, an environment where this is all clearly defined, so that people know how much money are we as a public project sponsor or as a private project sponsor. So how much money is Nova Scotia or the federal government of Canada willing to put into trying to demonstrate something, and how much money are investors willing to demonstrate something up to a certain point, so that you have, I suppose, a very clear system. And to do that, you need a group of smart people to get together. You've already got some of them that are in there, and to really construct, I suppose, an incubation or acceleration program for tidal energy, where it's, you've got to demonstrate performance from an industry perspective, but you've also got to demonstrate performance against, a set criteria, and it's clear what those are. But at the same time, those criteria need to be achievable. So it doesn't do any good saying, okay, you've got to be able to take the name and address of each fish and get them to log in as they go past the turbine. That's not going to happen. That sort of seems to feel like what DFO is basically after. You've got to have something which is actually achievable with today's current technology, and then be trying to push that forwards as the industry develops and matures, and as you attract investment that can help that. And that investment, by the way, will be flowing through Nova Scotia.
MLA LeBlanc.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my question is for Ms. Bennett, and I would think Mr. Hayman, around the importance of force itself. In my past role as warden, I had the opportunity to tour that site, and it's very impressive. But from everything I'm hearing, force is essentially the linchpin or the key to keeping this industry alive. I guess my question would be around support. So I'm sure for force to be able to continue, they need to have deployments at the site to generate revenue. I know the federal government and the province has a role to play, so would it just not make sense to have the province step in and provide some bridge funding to ensure that a force remains in place and is sustainable while all these regulatory issues are dealt with?
Ms. Bennett.
Thank you for the question. So, yes, you're correct. I mean, FORCE was created by the province of Nova Scotia as a central part of the marine renewable energy strategy. Obviously, you know, as host, we have the infrastructure for developers to connect their devices to the provincial electricity grid. And then in our steward role, we have a Class 1 environmental assessment through Nova Scotia Environment and Climate Change. We're responsible for monitoring for many of the effects in the midfield of projects. And I guess in terms of, you know, going forward, you know, our model, you know, created as an instrument of public policy with public funds, as I said in my opening remarks, but we are dependent on private dollars. And so right now, you know, with the work of the task force and some of the key actions that are outlined there that need implementation to move forward, we are viewing this as a, you know, what could be or should be or is a very exciting potential transition for the sector into this next stage of development. And, you know, as an example of that, I'd mentioned in the opening, it's incredibly disappointing, you know, the outcome for sustainable marine and a technology that was delivering clean renewable energy to our province. But there are other projects that are in the Bay of Fundy and that want to demonstrate at force, including most recently in December, Eau Claire, Tidal announced that orbital marine power, which is the technology that has the most operating hours anywhere in the world. There's a device grid connected right now at the European Marine Energy Center in Orkney Islands. And so they want to be at force. And so we are in a transition period, certainly, and FORCE is very well positioned and capable to lead a lot of the work in the implementation. And so to move forward into this next stage, realize this potential opportunity for Nova Scotia, we would, you know, the very strong shows of support from both levels of government are really critical to that success going forward.
Mr. Hayman, did you have a comment there?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think absolutely from an industry's perspective, FORCE is an amazing facility, as I've indicated before, and it has something that's very, very important, which is that grid connection infrastructure. You know, the fact that a developer can come to a site and can connect and put those electrons on the grid and actually sell those electrons, and you know, so don't forget that with feed-in tariff or revenue support type mechanisms like that, you only get paid for success. So there is, if you like, you know, a pot at the end of the rainbow that encourages everyone to try and figure out how to get electrons down that grid connection and get paid for delivering. And that's critical if you want to, you know, bring you know, technology developers in. Now, as to the question about whether the province should step in, I'd say, or the federal government, or a mixture of the two, absolutely. It is completely unfair to ask industry to continue to pay for bursts at force while there is no clear way to be able to deliver a project there, because effectively you're paying rent on something that you can't use. And we did that for a very long time. I mean, our shareholders, largest shareholder, Tidal before us, and ourselves, combined, we paid berth fees from 2014 through to 2023. So, you know, we were very happy to support FORCE and pay the berth fees when the ball was in our court. But when it's not, and you're not able, FORCE doesn't have, there's no economic value to those berths until this is sorted out. And you know, Lindsay mentioned Orbital. They're a fantastic company, and they're doing amazing things as well in the technology space. I think they're certainly our closest competitor, and now I'd say they're top of the pile. But, you know, are you going to be able to get them to come and pay berth fees without a clear path to how they can develop that site? And I think the answer is no. No company can justify that to their shareholders. And Chair, I'm afraid I am going to have to, I'm very sorry for that, but I have another business engagement that requires my attention.
Well, thank you for attending, Mr. Hayman. We appreciate your time.
Thank you. And I sincerely hope that, that something positive comes out of this for tidal energy in Nova Scotia.
Thank you very much. Next, I have MLA Palmer, who will be followed by MLA Hanson.
Thanks, Chair. I have a question for Mr. Hayman. Unfortunately, he had to leave. One of the reasons, but I'm going to actually direct it to Ms. Obermann, because I'm sure when you work with industry and work with many of the stakeholders, you're always looking at the potential economic impact, right? And one of the reasons I like being on this committee is natural resources and economic development. So we get a chance to discuss, many of the things happening in renewable energy and the environmental impacts of the positives of moving towards renewable energy. But it's also, always exciting to hear about the economic spin-offs. Job creation and those types of things. So Mr. Hayman would be a great one to talk about that because he's an investor going all over the world to do these things. But I'd like to ask maybe Ms. Obermann and Ms. Bennett, if you'd like to chime in. Are there economic studies done around the impact for the province of Nova Scotia not having a thriving tidal sector would be? Because a lot of years it's been going on and we've sort of missed out over a long time. So maybe I can pass this over to you to answer that question.
Ms. Obermann.
Thank you. One study that was done, I believe it was in 2015, and it was commissioned by the province, is a value proposition for tidal energy, and so that provides some of the, the stats with the, really looking at the strategy of building the industry here and exporting to the global market. And so that's, I guess, a really key piece here is that, when we started looking at tidal energy, the idea was Nova Scotia could lead in the world in developing technologies here, developing a supply chain that could then export. And so there's stats there. I don't know off the top of my head, so I wouldn't be able to give you numbers, but I'm happy to provide those later. But what I kind of also wanted to mention is that, we have evidence in front of us with just the number of members that Marine Renewables Canada has. So I mentioned we have a lot of local suppliers. A lot of them have worked on tidal energy projects and are now working internationally with tidal projects around the world, also in British Columbia, so other areas of the country. So I do think that demonstrates that, there is this economic potential, and it also builds capacity and capabilities with our local companies. And a lot of them are also now looking at, how do I transfer some of that experience to offshore wind? And so I think, tidal has played a really critical role in how local companies can find opportunities. And, we had mentioned AF Terrio during this, but, there are many others that have been involved in the tidal sector and I think have aspirations, to be able to do a lot more moving forward.
Thank you. MLA Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is to Ms. Bennett. One of the things that came out of the Federal Task Force on Sustainable Tidal Energy Development in the Bay of Fundy was the creation of a risk monitoring system or a working group to closely track potential fish collision risks. And we heard today that just by the opening remarks and some of the questions that were answered, that there is a lot of work around that to make sure that there isn't the collision risk. I'm just curious to know whether this working group is up and running and are they meeting regularly?
Ms. Bennett.
Thank you. Yes, so the Risk and Monitoring Working Group that was struck by the Tidal Energy Task Force in its early days, I would say that was probably 2 or 3 meetings of 7 that happened over the course of the work of the task force, has been meeting regularly. Actually, we have a meeting later this week. And so that task force is, it's co-chaired by Forrest, myself, and Dr. Anna Redden from Acadia Tidal Energy Institute. And they have been a player and a leader in the research community around tidal for many, many decades, really. And so the group is constituted, and there's representation there from many different organizations. Mi'kmaq Conservation Group, I believe, certainly KMKNO, the province of Nova Scotia and various departments. DFO participates in these meetings. Industry has been invited. And really, the purpose of that group is to essentially create a science plan to move forward. There's been a ton of great work and research and science done. And so it is building on all of that as a foundation so that we can continue to further our understanding of collision risk and also monitoring approaches that will be effective for tidal energy devices, and really aim to narrow, kind of close the delta, I guess, between perceived and an actual risk, and really further our understanding so that we can move the sector forward.
Good. Next, I have Emily Sheehy-Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as we talk about, the roadmaps, it's been a decade and all these conversations and task force that have been created, yet here we are still meeting at this committee today, a year later from when maybe it was supposed to come, and we're still at that same place. So I'm just trying to get my head around and understand better. You think of how large, the ocean is and the basin, and all of that tidal energy is just sitting there waiting to be used. So why would you say, just curiosity, would wind and solar energy projects have progressed more rapidly? Why is it that they've seemed to come in full circle and being implemented, but yet tidal energy is just staying so stagnant for so long?
Ms. Obermann?
Thanks very much for the question. I think we have to look back at when we started looking at onshore wind and also offshore wind. So, most of my knowledge is in the marine and offshore sector. Offshore wind, started in the 1990s I believe, in Denmark. And so, it's been a while also with offshore wind to get the costs down and to get to this point where there is, rapid growth around the world. And I think one of the interesting things about it is that, solar, onshore, offshore wind, whatever it may be, there's still innovation happening. They're still trying to prove technologies, bring costs down. And so while we're, at a kind of slow point with tidal, I do think it's still very similar to what other renewable energy sectors have experienced, and which is why, we're kind of at this really critical point where we have this task force and recommendations, and we do need to act on those as quickly as possible to make sure, there is momentum and we progress. But I don't think that we can, lose sight of the fact that this has happened with other sectors. It has been slow to progress in other areas. But the other thing that I will point out too is that, for example, onshore wind in Canada has received billions of dollars in investment, public sector investment. We have not seen the same for tidal. And so sometimes it comes down to that as well, in terms of supports and how quickly you can accelerate a technology. While there has been a lot of support for tidal, we just haven't seen it at the same level that we have seen with other renewable technologies.
Ms. Bennett?
Yes, and just what I can say, and I'd like to provide, I guess, a little bit of context too around timelines and time scales here for tidal energy projects. As Elisa rightly noted before, it would be very exciting to see a technology deployed in the next 12 months. Right now, Current Power is a developer at Force that has a device built and that they are working towards progress in their planning to have that deployed. But what the Tidal Task Force heard in engaging some of the industry members is that, from the time that there is a regulatory path by way of a Fisheries Act authorization that might be issued by DFO for one of these projects to move forward under a revised stage approach, from there, industry would need to finalize their commercial arrangements, and at that point, they would be able to begin procurement and construction of a device. So, some of the other near-term wins that we would like to see in this province and for these projects at Force is Fisheries Act authorizations issued, and that will allow these projects to get started with construction, at which point, those deployments will be a number of years down the road. With lots of work to be done in between, as we again continue to further our understanding of monitoring approaches and collision risk.
Emily Hanson.
Hello. Hi. Wrong mic.
Sorry. I did say Hanson too. Emily Sheehy-Richard for a follow-up.
And now I kind of lost my train of thought. What was I going to ask? Oh, yes. So I guess, is it safe to say that, if we're working on regulations and it would be, if they could have a foothold to know that right now you have permission to start building your technology, as we study it and learn it and progress over the next whatever, you may not be given the full clearance of approval, but really what industry's needing is that first step of approval from the federal government to start the project while you work towards the completion of the project. Like, that's probably like the big thorn in the room.
Ms. Bennett?
Yes, and so certainly the work of the federal task force was aimed at clarifying the process for projects to obtain a Fisheries Act authorization that has alignment with the provincial licensing regime. And so in the case of projects that force power purchase agreements, of 15 years and a scope of 4.5 to 5 megawatts. And so developers are in various stages, or developers that choose to operate in Nova Scotia and at the Force site will be in various stages of working towards obtaining Fisheries Act authorizations from DFO so that they can move on to the next planning and construction pieces of their projects, yes.
Thank you. Next, I have Emily LeBlanc.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As a fisheries critic, I have to ask one fisheries-related question. I know when I speak to the industry, there's a lot of concern around displacement, not necessarily for tidal, but in general. You have the marine protected areas, aquaculture, and offshore wind. So I know you did touch on it a little bit, but I guess just to put a bow around it is, how has your relationship been with the industry itself? And do you feel that the tidal industry has a social license to operate from your point of view?
Ms. Bennett.
Thank you. So, I guess for tidal energy to move forward successfully, we talked about viability of cost, but it also requires coexistence with other users of the resource. And so since Force was created, we've done quite a bit of work and with our progressing conversations with commercial fishers, with Indigenous fishers, and to understand their concerns, to try and hear their feedback, incorporate that into decision making around research projects and even around deployments when Cape Sharp's projects were deployed. And we know there's concerns, and we know that people that are involved in the commercial fishery have a whole set of concerns and things that they worry about every day that are very different than what we might be thinking about. And so this coexistence requires ongoing dialogue. We've had fishers as part of our community liaison committee and our environmental monitoring advisory committees. We've worked with fishers at times, in the delivery of research projects, and it's certainly something that is ongoing. It needs to be continued, those conversations, particularly as projects kind of become consented and real to be moving forward at the site. Those need to continue. So that we can, it's not one or the other, so that, the commercial fishery and Indigenous fisheries can be protected, as can marine life, and we can also pursue this opportunity of clean energy from the tides.
Oh, Ms. Obermann.
Thank you. If I could just build on that a little bit, just the question of social license and working with fisheries. I do want to point out, I think one of the challenges we have had with Tidal is that it's a new technology, and a lot of people don't understand how it works, what the impacts are. And so, just going back to that question of, what can the province do? How can you help support? I do think that education and engagement piece is really important. And so, as much as Force and industry tries to, help with that, there's a role there for government and others to play as well. And I think that could go a long way in helping, a lot of different types of stakeholders and rights holders in understanding the technology, better as we go forward.
Thank you. Ms. Bennett.
Thank you. Sorry, just an add-on point too. I'd mentioned in my opening remarks that in terms of just more broad social license, there was polling conducted, public opinion polling, and this was in 2016 at a time when there was a legal challenge being mounted by the Bay of Fundy and Shore Fishermen's Association against the Cape Sharp Tidal project, and there was a billboard by the McDonald Bridge that's, indicated, characterized tidal energy as grinding Nemo. And there was some critics that spent months taking their case against Tidal to radio and print and broadcast media, and still the public support was over 80%. And so I remember very distinctly the day that somebody from Corporate Research Associates presented this research to us. There was an oversampling around the Bay of Fundy. There was a total of 500 people polled. And so there were about 200 of those were in the surrounding the Bay of Fundy, and it was expressed to us that seeing those types of numbers, over 80% support, is a very strong signal, and with the expectation in some of the questions in the public opinion polling that people are supportive of demonstration. They want the learning to happen. They also want to know that the environment is protected.
Thank you. Next, I have MLA Palmer, followed by MLA Young. MLA Palmer.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm sitting here today. There's a few things I've learned, I think, sitting in this meeting this afternoon. The first is Nova Scotia has amazing potential and we know that, to be a leader in clean energy and renewable energy sources. We've seen it in offshore wind. We're developing solar, and we're trying to do with Tidal. So that's number one. Number two, it's a win-win. Developing a thriving and a productive tidal industry and the economic impact, and doing it in an environmentally responsible way. And third is that we have a federal government that seems to abdicate its responsibility in creating those pathways. So, it's kind of frustrating in a way to be sitting here and, like what's been said earlier, knowing what we have in our hands and having the inability to really pursue it. But I guess the question I have is comparing where we're at in Canada, in Nova Scotia, to other jurisdictions. And this would have been a question, I think, for Mr. Hayman, but maybe Ms. Obermann, you might be able to provide some insight as well into other jurisdictions around the world and comparing what some of those other areas are doing with those regulatory pathways and support for those tidal energy projects, comparing to here.
Ms. Obermann.
Thanks for the question. So in terms of global development of tidal energy, the jurisdiction we look at quite a bit is Scotland, but overall Europe is doing, other countries in Europe are doing quite a bit of work there as well. To date, there's been about 40 megawatts deployed of capacity, and so I reflect that point because that's also important to our learnings as we move forward. So wherever a device is deployed globally, it's going to be helpful for us. From a regulatory perspective, as you know, different jurisdictions have different frameworks and different types of regulators. And so in some ways, it's been streamlined more in Scotland because they have one body, Marine Scotland, which acts essentially as a one window. So you don't have as much of that federal provincial dynamic, and I think that has probably helped to move things forward. But to be honest, and just even a number of years ago, I think with Nova Scotia having its own Marine Renewable Energy Act, which is the only province in all of Canada that has that, along with feed-in tariffs and support from the federal government through some of their larger funding programs, Nova Scotia really was, is still, I think, viewed as one of the major global players in tidal in terms of, where the market is, where we should go. And I really think that that's why these next, few months, this next phase is just so critical, because I think we could really realize the potential if we get it right at this point.
Thank you. Next up, my last speaker yet right now is MLA She Richard.
I was just sitting here commenting. This is just so exciting. It really is. But I guess I was going to ask, how do you see, when we talk about this excitement, how do you see the changes, the revised federal regulatory approach affecting, the future tidal projects? How do you define that excitement, if you will?
Ms. Bennett?
Yes, that's a really great question, and it's certainly one that we think about all the time at Force, because amongst our team there's still great morale and excitement for this tidal energy opportunity that members of our science team are working hard at every day, along with partner organizations, to try and make sure that the path is clear for developers. I would say that in the work over the past year, you heard from Mr. Hayman, and it was quite disappointing for the sector. I mean, actually, if we back up before that, it was quite exciting. It was a huge milestone when their device was deployed and grid connected in Grand Passage. Very disappointing that that project won't be coming to force. But a lot's happened over the past year. As I mentioned, we're very thankful to the Premier of Nova Scotia and both ministers, DFO and NRCan, for striking the federal task force. Force also received correspondence from Department of Fisheries and Oceans earlier this year reaffirming their commitment to supporting the sector and supporting tidal energy demonstration in the Minas Passage. So that, measures like that certainly create that excitement, that energy. And so through the work of the task force, the final report, this commitment from DFO to work very closely with the sector. And certainly we've seen that in action with their two representatives that went to the UK recently, attended the Environmental Interactions of Marine Renewables Conference in Scotland, where Canada had quite a very significant delegation that went there to present research. And we are very much viewed as leading in some of the areas of research. And some of the actions that are outlined specifically for DFO in that final task force report that, myself and others are in routine contact with them. We know these are things they're working on. And so having that capacity, within DFO to be focused on working with the sector has created some excitement, and we're, very much looking forward to seeing that continue through the implementation of the other task force findings.
Thank you. Emily LeBlanc.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When we talk about renewables, and there's a lot of emphasis on offshore wind, green hydrogen. I mean, all good, important projects. Do you feel that maybe Tidal has lost or has been overshadowed by those industries? Do you feel that the province is paying enough attention to Tidal at this point?
Ms. Obermann?
I will answer that question because my members cover all of those things. And, I think the way that we look at it, one is, we know that in terms of investment globally, there's a lot more going into offshore wind and now green hydrogen. We have seen the tidal sector. It is a smaller sector. The way our members have been looking at all of it within Nova Scotia is that there's a lot of synergies just in terms of the supply chain, knowledge, research, and so tidal and offshore wind and green hydrogen, they can all benefit from it being developed in the province. I think, what we need to think about is what is that kind of overarching cohesive strategy for how we use all of those renewable resources. And that, would help, I think, the tidal industry to understand more how do we fit into this bigger picture that is progressing and being developed.
Good. Emily Richard with 4 minutes left.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just curious if we could get, if the committee could get an update on the current status of the berths that are in the Minas Basin site and the potential challenges that you're facing in filling them.
Ms. Bennett?
Thank you. Yeah, sure. So at our in our Crown Lease area, we have 5 berths, and the projects that are there right now, we have Eau Claire Tidal, which in December it was announced that Orbital Marine Power would be their technology provider, and that was approved by the province of Nova Scotia. DP Energy with their Andritz Hammerfest hydro technology. Those are 1.5 megawatt devices. They occupy berths B and E currently. Berth C was the sustainable marine berth. That is still, one of the assets of the project that is being administered through Deloitte, the trustee. And berth D is Eau Current Power. So this was formerly Big Moon Power. There was a news release recently about some changes in that company. And so they have been assigned berth D at the Force site. So those are the 5 berths. And in terms of challenges, like I said, Eau Current Power is is planning and working towards a deployment, and some of the other developers are in planning stages right now, assessing things in kind of the post-task force era that we're in, and understanding how to progress in conversations with DFO.
Thank you. No further questions? That brings me to the point of closing. So what I would ask for, if either of you ladies have a closing comment, closing remarks, 2 minutes or whatever you might choose about that time, and we just have a small piece of business, so we don't have a lot of time afterwards. We don't need it. So closing remarks, Ms. Obermann?
My opening remarks reflected the need for certainty, regulatory certainty, investment certainty, and so we've talked a lot today about the regulatory issue, and I think, I hope we've conveyed how the task force is a step in the right direction. However, I think in order for it to be successful, there really needs to be a sustained, long-term commitment from governments to be working together. But I also want to recognize the fact that, I think a few of you had pointed out just how critical Force's role is in all of this. And, we're at a critical point for how Force will help support that task force work. And so thinking about that, and some of the things that have come up about the model with birth holders and public and private sector funding, we really have to think about how do we ensure that kind of initiative and force help to support this next phase, because I think without that kind of the support that Force would need to move forward, maybe we won't see the results we need to see coming out of some of the task force implementation. And so it is a very critical piece, and so I just wanted to leave the committee with thinking about that and how all of us can work together to support those next steps. And thank you very much for having me here today too.
Thank you. Ms. Bennett?
Yeah, so I guess just final points to leave you with is that baked into Force's creation when we were created by the province of Nova Scotia was very much a model that has us reliant on private investment to maintain our continuous operations. We've had no sustained funding at any point since we were created. But we exist very much to help realize this opportunity for Nova Scotia and lower the barriers of entry for developers. And so we are very much in a transitionary phase right now, and excited about helping to pave the way and lead and work with the province of Nova Scotia and other partners to implement the things that are outlined in the task force, so that we can really understand what this opportunity is for Nova Scotia. And it may feel like, or it certainly, the sector may not be where we thought we would be by 2024. And I would say that the pace of things has been a little bit slower globally. That's not something that's unique to us in Nova Scotia. But the story that also I'd like to make sure, or the theme that needs to come through, I think, is that there have been amazing successes too in this province and incredible learnings. And so we're not starting from scratch, both in terms of the research. Certainly technologies are still pre-commercial, but those are advancing quickly too with deployments globally. And so this is a real opportunity. There's been a lot of very good work done, and in the grand scheme of when we were created, I'd say that the opportunity is still there, the potential to export is still there, and this vast opportunity to generate clean electricity from the tides as a world leader. Thank you.
Thank you both. As chair of this committee, I get the privilege of thanking you both for your information today, as well as Mr. Hayman. Not to be a pun, but you helped us through muddy waters. It's a great opportunity that we have before us, and it is not exactly clear, so we appreciate all your information. It's been great. Thank you very much. We've agreed to just stay seated until they leave the building so we can finish our committee business. Thank you. call us back to order. I appreciate your cooperation, members, as we went through some technology difficulties there. So the only piece of committee business I have is a letter from Deputy Minister Gation, which responded to our request for information regarding output-based pricing system and carbon pricing, the Affordable Energy Coalition's task force report, and building code changes regarding more efficient energy use. In her response, the deputy stated that we should contact the organizations for a better, fulsome answers. So I ask if you have any speaking on this to start with. Do we want to contact the organizations she's mentioned? I see no response. Okay. Our next meeting, no further business, I take it? No motions following that? Okay, thank you. Our next meeting is scheduled for June 25th, and it's the Nova Scotia film industry. Witnesses our Department of Community, Culture, Tourism, and Heritage. I call this meeting to adjourn.